Welcome to Warhammer Wednesday. I'm your host, Randy, and this is brought to you by Grimdark Live. This is a Warhammer What If, brought to you by Grimdark Live, where we look into what if they did something different for each army, like what if, what if, what if. And you thought giants were big. What if every army got something on the 280 by 210 base? So we start with a little bit of story time. Most of these models are still can be currently used in the Age of Sigmar, minus a couple of them, and some were, recently only made for Age of Sigmar and never existed in the Warhammer Fantasy Battles game. But while at the end of 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles, Forge World decided to jump into making models and stuff, and then that launched basically their attempt at making a apocalypse game for Age of Sigmar, even though it was still had point restrictions, and you didn't play double the army size or whatever, but they had launched Storm of Magic, which allowed you to play basically an additional 25% of what you were playing as monsters. And in doing so, they launched the book and basically gave rules to stuff they had on the Forge World page, and then started making this beautiful book. This is the Monstrous Arcanum. It has, what they consider scrolls, which are then used for your additional 25%. One of the last things they did in End Times was throw the percentages out of the window and say this army composition could be anything you want. You could use any hero or lords and or core, special, and rare, along with any scrolls of binding. So they kind of just made sure everybody could use all their stuff, because some of these things have points that just wouldn't fit in 25%. I remember a game with my buddy. We basically played a 5,000 point Storm of Magic game. One of the best, fun games I ever had, along with games like Triumph and Treachery. But all in all, Storm of Magic was some of my favorite games, just because they were more laid back, and it's all about monsters brawling and knocking people off tower, arcane fulcrums as they called them. And so I'm just gonna flip through some of my favorites in the book, and most of these are still some of them didn't get models and some of them did, but there are a few that I enjoyed. There's Helping Abominations and stuff, you could use them as scrolls of binding, but just I just always loved the big monster lore of the game. It's always been fascinating to me, and big stuff. And we start with the Incarnates. They are basically the 8. Well, now you consider the 8 realms, but the Magic's made the realms. So you had Element of Fire, Death, and whatever. They only made models for 2 of them, which is the Element of Fire Incarnate, and then Incarnate of Beasts. These models still exist. I'm at, off and on the Forge World webpage, as they're starting to dwindle down. But one of my favorites is a model that never got used or whatever, but it is for Tomb Kings. And they didn't officially make the model, but many people have done conversions, and the art just looks fantastic. And as we go over, here's a normal, man-sized person, this big giant, Incarnate. So, if it was on a base or whatever, I did do a start of a conversion. using the Starship Troopers big bug or kit when they came out with the Starship Trooper games, and it starts to look like that. So that's what you see. That's like that weird bug on the table. No, it's not a giant Tyranid, even though it could be. You know, I was making it into the Scarab. So, then some other notable things. There is, you know, this was the Dread Syrian. You know, this is the art before the official model came out. Looks a little bit more slender than the what they came out with, but you know, that is pretty fun. I've actually used them in the new rules, and it's pretty fun to have 35 wounds and stuff. Just yeah. And then the last one, I'll flip some of these. Okay. So the Magma Dragon is still used as a monster destruction. That is a pretty sweet model, but that's not as big as the. That's not the size that we're looking for. But there is another incarnate that I just wanted to show you guys that they never made a model for, and I think this would be a great idea to make all 8 of them across the board, and not just have the 2 model kits. Everybody knows me from my night hunt and the one girl. This became just a standard Vermin Lord when they made the kit slightly bigger. Those who have been playing Warhammer Total War 2 may recognize this from the Pirate Army, even though the one has like a 3-shot cannon on this side, but this is the Necrofex Colossus. They never actually did in the old Warhammer. They never made the. They had a White Dwarf issue of the Vampires of the Coast or whatever, but they never did the. They never did an actual release. The Dreadmaw I still use today. It's a 440 point monster in destruction, which means he can only be used in a destruction, you know, straight list. Doesn't have any other allegiance abilities other than the destruction one. He's 440 points, so he can't be like added as an ally. So he is pretty fun to use, and I use him in my army with all my femurs. So Basilisk is still cool. Here it is the Incarnate of Death. I thought that was always cool. Like you know, they didn't do like a giant, you know, Grim Reaper for it. They, you know, that was just kind of interesting to see that. So now we're going to close the storybook and just do some videos of what, you know, some of these big guys look like. So first up is the Order Seraphon / Lizardmen Dread Syrian. This was also introduced into Total War. You may have seen it. The one in Total War actually has a howdah, like a platform here with like a bunch of skinks on it. It looks pretty sweet with the, you know, guy, but you know, as of right now, it's great in the Thunder Lizard list. I kind of enjoy been playing it. So next up is the thing that launched Forge World into the first Warhammer is the Tamakin. This Beast for Nurgle is, you know, pretty sweet. He came out with a bunch of Plague Frogs and Frog Riders and Plague Ogres and Plague Trolls. He's not glued on because in some other games and Storm of Magic and stuff, you can have an unwritten Toad Dragon, but he is pretty sweet. Next up, you know, you're seeing the 3 Mammoths over here. These are pretty fun. So these are also in Warhammer Total War, but you may notice they have 5 different variations, which is kind of fun. You have the unwritten variation. Then you have a Howdah with Marauders in it, and then you have a Howdah with Marauders and a Chaos Lord, which is kind of, you know, when they updated the scroll, I enjoy the game each of the marks or whatever, but like, you know, just like a Stegodon or whatever, like give one profile and then say like you may upgrade this to like a hero for 50 points and just give it some command ability and like one extra wound or something. It's a shame that, you know, this Lord is not a hero on this mammoth. But next up is something that didn't make it over into Age of Sigmar, is the Emperor Chaos Dragon. So in the old world, you had basically a couple different sizes of dragons. From when they first came out, I remember my first dragon was on a 40 millimeter by 40 millimeter square base. You know, people like calling them the anorexic dragons or whatever. You know, they're very snaky and they wind back and forth, making like S patterns and stuff. And then like the rider sits on like the shoulders, and then the head and then the long neck does one more S pattern or whatever. But this, however, is pretty sweet. You know, it is missing a few claws, but I am working on that. I'm doing some press molding. So this is a beaut. We used this in the siege game, but we never made it to the final turn. All I like for the rules wise for this, I just take the Compendium Chaos Dragon and multiply everything by 3. So it's a 330 point model or something, and with 3 of them, it comes out to like 1,020 points or something, you know, and just basically put a 3 in front of everything and then double its movement. So it ends up, you know, fairly balanced. So, but then again, it's, you know, 1,000 points, which is half your army. And then the final model, which is actually current and actually wasn't made for Storm of Magic and came out specifically for Age of Sigmar, is this giant corn beast. He is fantastic. So he now doesn't have the most amount of wounds, because when they redid the Dread Syrian, they upped the Dread Syrian to 35. But this guy, let me tell you, can really rip open the lines back and forth. The game that I had against a couple guys from the club, they literally shot this down with Greywater fastness, leaving it at almost like 1 or 2 wounds left out of the 30, and it still was able to kill, like, just its attacks, just three stone trolls out of a unit of 9, and that was only like dropping his attacks down to 3 instead of, you know, 3d3 worth of attacks, and, you know, instead of like it's like 6 main attacks hitting on 2s was all the way down to hitting on 5s, and like it still was able to shred some pretty nasty stuff. So like I said, it was on the deployment line and was gonna lunge forward, but they got priority to go first, and, you know, a few steam tanks and rocket batteries and, you know, all the Greywater fastness was able to shoot it down to about, I don't remember, it was like 1 or 2 wounds, but it was in its last profile of 0 to 3 out of 30. So that's the current range of Sigmar and some of the bigger models that I have, and we'll just go on to some clips of ideas for big stuff for other armies.
With Warhammer Fantasy Battles and Age of Sigmar, the lore behind the armies has been very vast and long stretching. The pictures in the various army books and stuff that has come out, there's always been large battles depicted in the art. And in doing so, some things, like per se a giant Empire cannon being loaded by a giant, or as an image you see here is a shows the zeppelins in the background, and the circled is a what they thought was a dwarf like hammer tank, as they called it. They thought that they were gonna get like stone idols or mechanical steam, engineered produced like siege engines that never came around. But as you can see, they have them in the background. With this art, GW released rules for the Wrath of Thunder, which was a zeppelin that didn't have any points and was not used in a normal game, but they had battle reports that they had a model for that was scratch built and used as a narrative. It was then later that Forge World made the actual Zeppelin model, but in War Master scale and not for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. It wouldn't be later until Age of Sigmar where the dwarves of the Warhammer universe ended up taking to the skies and making the Cauldron Overlords. As you see, this is a person's creative project where I don't know if it's for a display board or for big games or whatever, but decided to take a model that would, their normal airship, which is, on the standard 170 millimeter base, and make basically a flying juggernaut. So there was a White Dwarf issue back in the day for Warhammer Fantasy Battles called Legendary Battles. This was done to promote large games, like, for the 25th anniversary, you paid 25,000 points, such big games and whatnot. So, me and my club members at NIU decided to have a giant legendary battle. I believe it was 3 versus 3 with 5,000 points each, but as a special project, I made a giant treeman. So I basically took the rules for the Emperor Dragon and basically replaced its 2 breath attacks with 2 shots of Tangle Root, and basically had the same stat line as it. And at that time, I was designing stuff for basically a big model for every army that was on a 200 millimeter by 200 millimeter base. This was the movement tray size sheets that they used to sell, and just make a base of it, and have my ideas were, of course, a Zeppelin, as previously shown, and for this I did a giant treeman, and as it pictured, it does look pretty sweet. I don't have it anymore, but that allows you to bring up the rules of proxy as is. So I remember at a GW, the the orc players would they had a quote unquote squigadon. They would use the Stegadon's rules for the beast and the mount or whatever, and then use the squig off from Forge World and have a howdah with orcs in it. This also was implemented. You may have seen it at Adepticon, but the giant squig off with in the Warhammer Fantasy games, they instead of putting the metal 40k looking top shell on it, they converted a Warhammer Siege Tower to basically go as a howdah on top of it, and thus giving you something for destruction on a 220 by or 280 by 210 base. Next up is something for the Idenith Deepkin. They all know the story that they're in the ocean and whatnot, and they were discovered by Skaven, filling up a whale and sending it down to the bottom of the into the ocean. And in doing so, that just got me thinking of like, all right, they have their sea turtle and their sharks and their eels and whatever. But I'm like, what creature would be awesome to see on the table on a big 280 by 210 base? And for most of you, you would think first thing that popped into my head was a kraken. This would be fantastic. A deep sea beast has always been in the sea lore. That'd be fantastic. There are plenty of 3D printed models out there for them, and just something like rules wise, have a like a beak attack. So when it pulls into something close, like its mouth would be like 4 attacks, 3s by 3s, -2, 3 damage, and then have a diminishing attack of 8 tentacles, because it's octopus, 8 and Squidward, whatever. He have 8 attacks, um, like 3s by 3s, -1, 2 damage, but number of attacks diminishing, but also give it a special rule where like if 3 of the to hit numbers are matching, have like a drag under rule where just like Archaon, slaying outright with the sword, slay a model outright, but then remove the Kraken from the table, put it in reserve, and then have to come in like in the following turn anywhere on the table and such, as it wrapped its tentacles around whatever and dragged it to the deep sea. Thanks for watching this monstrous video. If you guys want to print any large monsters or whatever, remember to follow our links that we have for 3D frag printing. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And thanks, and make sure the monsters don't get you.